Hey guys. So this video is for entertainment and education purposes only. Any and everything I say could be wrong. Do your own research and come to your own conclusions. So I just watched a documentary on the Killdozer. The Killdozer. That's pretty crazy, right? Yeah. And so my buddy was telling me about the Killdozer. And of course I'd heard about it, but I never looked too much into it. You know, it's just like any and everything, you know, there's so much bullshit. Who cares? And that happened, that happened in 2000, what was it, 2004? Yeah, I had so much insane shit going on in my personal life, didn't really care about, you know, something happening, you know, 1,000 miles away from me in some little town, you know, who cares, right? My friend was like pointing it out to me, you know, the whole thing. I'm like, yeah, I've heard about the Killdozer and shit and stuff, but I've never really looked into it. So I watched a documentary on it. It's on YouTube. And yeah, so I wanted to talk about it. The Killdozer thing, right? So one of the first things that I took away from this story. So the documentary is about an hour and a half long, and the story is set in small town America. So it's this little tiny fucking town out in the middle of nowhere. And it's run by the good old boys. Right? And I'm thinking, wow, I'm getting a little bit of deja vu here. So I have 15 subscribers, right? Well, I had this totally insane thing happen to me in this little tiny town out in the middle of nowhere that involved murder, a death threat, and fucking my place getting burnt down a week after I got the death threat. And it's this big mystery to this day, like nobody knows what happened. Everybody's just like, nobody knows. It's just a big mystery. Well, I know what happened. It's the good old boys. I know exactly what it's all about. And so I know what that guy who built the Killdozer went through, because I had my own personal experience with the good old boys who run a little tiny town out in the middle of nowhere. So, you know, if you've never lived in a little tiny ass town out in the middle of nowhere, your perspective on the Killdozer story might be different than someone who has lived in a little tiny town out in the middle of nowhere. Now, if you have lived in a little tiny town out in the middle of nowhere, there's only a couple options. You can either stick your fucking head in the sand with your ass pointed up to get fucked whenever the good old boys feel like getting their dick wet. Or you stand up straight and keep your eyes wide open and keep your head on a fucking swivel. Those are about the two options you got. Now, what do you think the majority of people in a little tiny town out in the middle of nowhere do? Do they stand firm and stand their ground, or do they stick their head in the sand and hope for the best? What do you think? Okay, so for those of you who think that the majority of people in a small town, they all stand firm and with their eyes open and head on a swivel, raise your hand. Yeah, that's because you're a dumbass. These little tiny towns out in the middle of nowhere in America, are microcosms of the world, the way the entire world works. Well, what do people say? What do you hear people saying the way the world works? Oh, it's all globalist Jews that run everything, right? And if you even question it, where you're like, well, I see how you could think that, but are you totally sure? I mean, maybe you're only half right. No, it's not it's the Jews, you stupid, right? Like, if you even question that the world is run any other way than it's just all controlled by the evil satanic Jews, well, you just get mocked into oblivion. Okay, so then you agree that the whole world is run by the evil Jews, right? Well, guess what it's like in small town America? I'm telling you, these little tiny towns out in the middle of nowhere are microcosms of the way the whole world works. You get front row seats if you're in a little tiny town out in the middle of nowhere. So I know what the killdozer guy went through. I had the exact, well, mine was, dude, arguably my situation was worse. Like, way worse. But who's going to believe me, right? I'm just some crazy, unkempt, right? And that's why, so what are you going to do? You can either get gaslit, totally fucking gaslit, and freak the fuck out, which happens in this little town about once every 3 years. Some guy just mysteriously is like running around crazy, shooting guns at people and shit. And then tons of unmarked cars come flying in with helicopters, and then they take him out. And guess what? There's no newspaper and there's no news because it's just some little town out in the middle of nowhere. So it just gets swept under the rug. Move on to the next thing. These little towns are all run the same. Now, you can call me a conspiracy theorist while you go on and on and on about how everything is the Jews, stupid. Go ahead and call me a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, the Jews are the most evil race in the whole wide world, and the Jews run everything, and blah, blah. But as far as crazy shit happening in small town America, absolutely not. Small town America, that's where all the good old boys, everybody's just clean as a whistle in the little towns, right? Yeah. And anybody who says otherwise is just a fucking conspiracy theorist. Says the guy who's going on and on all the time about how the Jews run the whole world, right? Yeah, okay, buddy. You know what I'm saying? No. So anyways, so I know what's going on in small town America. Look, this town that I'm referencing, that of my personal experience, dude, they claim there's just over 2,000 people population here. That's bullshit, because probably about half of these so-called residents, they only live here in the winter. And in the summer, they're in Hawaii or who knows, someplace where the weather's nice. It's 125 fucking degrees outside right now, bro. These people, half of these people that own houses and claim residency here, they don't even fucking live here. So this town, so let's give it the benefit of the doubt, even though they're lying when they're claiming that the population of this town. We'll give it the benefit of the doubt. We'll say 2,000 people, which is over generous. Okay, that's how small this town is. That town where the killdozer shit went down is like 5 times the size of this town. Okay, so anyways, so yeah, and it's very easy to spin a story like that to make the killdozer guy look like he's just crazy. There's no way he just got gaslit by the town. Oh no, that would never happen. Because, small town America is just peaches and cream. That's all it is in small town. All the corruption is in Israel, right? And in Washington, D.C. There's no corruption in small town America. No, it's all peaches and cream. Right. So anyhow, um, you know, so it's very easy to spin a story like that. Now, I don't agree with the killdozer thing. Okay. So, but that's the thing, like, I knew that I was getting gaslit by the good old boys that run this town. And they were trying to gaslight me so that I would do some crazy killdozer bullshit. I knew it, like, it's, and that's another thing. Like, see, when these kinds of things happen, nobody's gonna believe you. But nobody's gonna believe you. But you know what they are gonna believe? It's the Jews. Like, everything is the Jews. They are gonna believe that everything is the Jews, and the Jews are the synagogue of Satan, and all that. They'll believe that. But if you're just living in some little town and you're getting trampled by the good old boys, and they're just going after you to ass rape you and stuff, nobody's ever gonna believe you. They're gonna call you a conspiracy theorist, and that's the crazy guy in town and stuff. They're not gonna ever believe you. But like I said, those same people will believe that the Jews are the synagogue of Satan, and they have tunnels, child trafficking tunnels all over in America and all this other shit. They'll believe the stupidest shit. The truth? The truth is always just a conspiracy theory. So anyways, yeah, killdozer, very interesting story. Now, do I believe? Okay, so when I watched this documentary, you got both sides. And it subtly leaned toward the side of the town council, and it subtly spinned the story as though he's just some crazy lunatic, right? Fine, whatever. But see, that story is easy for city people to believe. The city people would easily believe that. Oh yeah, all those people that live in those small towns are stupid anyway. We're city people. We're way smarter than those small town people. So they'll believe, But anyways, do I believe that all that stuff that the killdozer guy, do I believe the allegations that he was putting out, that the town council was coming after him, and the good old boys that run the town were running him into the ground and mocking him and fucking his life up and doing all this shit intentionally, illegally? Do I believe that? Well, I had the same thing happen to me in Quartzsite. So I totally believe it. Now, do I agree with what he did? Dude, I would never do that. See, that's what they want. That's why, like I said, in this little town I'm referencing, once every 3 years you see somebody do some crazy killdozer shit in town. Once every 3 years. But it never even makes any news at all. It's just sweep that under the rug. I'm not even exaggerating. Every few years, something like that happens here. So anyway, and so here's a couple other takeaways I got from that. Okay, see, I'm just a simple guy. I live from day to day. I lived in my van for, I don't know, at least a year when I first got into this little tiny town. I just lived in my van and, worked some job and parked my van in the McDonald's parking lot. Then I bought a bigger van. It was like a little camper van, and I lived in that camper van for fucking 4 years or something. But my point is that, so like the Killdozer guy, that guy had a lot to lose. He had lots of property. He was making good money. You know, if you were to compare him to me, that guy's fucking rich. So money and wealth can cause people problems, you know. And whereas if that were to have happened to some poor person in that town, it could have been just as bad of a story, if not worse. And that poor person wouldn't get any attention at all. You know, nobody's going to care, you know. And the poor person doesn't have the means to build a fucking Killdozer anyways. So the poor person's just totally fucked. So one of my points and takeaways from this is, dude, so many of those people were getting fucked over by the town. You know, like the powerless, they just don't have, no matter what they do, there's nothing. Okay. Now, if that same thing happens to a person who has power, well, yeah, they might try to fight back because they have the means and resources to do so. So, like, when that happened to me, well, you know, luckily, I didn't have a Killdozer when that shit happened to me, because if I'd had a Killdozer, who knows what would have happened, you know. I'm glad I didn't have a Killdozer. And I'm glad I have sober-minded friends that I could call and talk to and stuff. And, you know, what happened to me happened 3 years ago. And I'm telling you, you wouldn't even believe it. And also because most people wouldn't believe the Killdozer story. You know, the guy that built the Killdozer, he explains why he did everything he did. And is basically, you know, the town was just fucking him and coming after him, you know. And he got fed up. Now, again, do I believe his story? Most definitely, because even little old me with nothing, the town came after me. And just like in the documentary, the town swears up and down that they weren't coming after that guy. They weren't coming after Marv. Marv just went crazy. The townspeople, the ones that Marv claims that he had a big beef with, that they were just fucking his life over, and they were targeting and coming after him. All those people he listed, the documentary interviewed them. Guess what they said? They all said, "Oh no, it was just a big old misunderstanding. We wasn't coming after old Marv. We wasn't. We's totally innocent. We weren't even doing nothing like that." Again, like you might be more inclined to believe those people that said they weren't coming after Marv. After I experienced what happened to me in Quartzsite, I already know without a doubt what happened. Sorry, I mean, believe whatever you want to believe. You know, you can just believe whatever you like. You know, this is a fantasy land. You know, there's no communism going on here. You know, believe whatever you want. But see, I know better. Now, if that hadn't happened to me 3 years ago, I would have a completely different perspective, and who knows how I might interpret that documentary. Not sure. But because of what happened to me in Quartzsite 3 years ago, involving the death of Todd Minshaw, that's arguably a murder that got swept under the rug, and which would explain why I got a death threat, and then a week later my home burns to the ground, you know. And I need to mention this. If you ever get a death threat and then a week later your home burns down, I want to tell you something. And I might be the only person you ever hear this from. If you get a death threat and then a week later your fucking home burns down along with half of the block, I want to tell you something. That would just be a coincidence that your home burnt down a week after you got a death threat, that would be less than 1 in a million chance. And that is a mathematically sound equation. That's a mathematically sound equation that the chances of your house burning down a week after you got a death threat being just all one big coincidence, that the two things aren't connected to each other, that would be less than 1 in a million chance. And that is a mathematically sound equation. That's not me pulling something out of my ass. I'm telling you the truth, okay? And so, long story short, what happened to me 3 years ago in this little tiny town I'm referencing, I get a death threat, and it's totally tied to Todd Minshall's death and all the people that surround Todd Minshall. I get a death threat from them, and a week later, the whole fucking place I lived at burns to the ground, along with half of the block. I'm talking like along with the fucking 4-bedroom house and a 2,000 square foot storage building. Measure that fucking block. Measure that block. If you are aware of the property I'm speaking of, you think I'm over exaggerating when I said half a block? You got Kofa and Elsie. You got Kofa and Elsie. And that's what Elsie is, 1 block up to the next street. Half of that block burnt down a week after I got a death threat, and that's where I live. No, that's less than a 1 in a million chance. Google it, motherfucker. Anyways, I'll get back to you on this one. Okay, boys? We'll get back to you on that. Okay,